Just the other day, I was listening to some of my backlog of video essays and opinion piece podcasts when I listened to this video. And in it, they kind of unknowingly start arguing about whether or not remakes have value in the first place, and talking about the perception of older video games being inferior to modern games. This discussion point has always bothered me, but in ways that have been hard to put my finger on why. The idea that older video games are, clunky, ugly by today's standards, really anything quote-unquote today's standards, and whether or not old games can hold up, or if were only praiseworthy for their time. I have some nuances to unpack with the discussion, but as an overview, my biggest position on this is that there is a difference between the quality of art and the ease of consumption, and that nothing in history is unique. If you want to talk about the changing of time and technology, you have to take a much broader approach. Let's get really broad. All mediums of art, all works of art that are widely considered to be masterworks. Older films like Citizen Kane, The Statue of David, The Sistine Chapel, the works of Shakespeare, Symphony No. 9, etc. All of these works of art were created in a bygone time period, and aspects of their creative process, and perhaps what informed their direction, was limited by their available technology. Nevertheless, these works of art are still, to this day, incredible, moving, powerful. They are effective art. The value of art is very different from the quality of technology. In fact, this kind of discussion broaches on an anthropological subject. When I was in school for communications and anthropology, something I recall that was heavily beaten into our heads was the idea that it's ignorant to look at past and present in terms of advancement. We try to avoid looking at countries with older technology or historical culture, whatever, as being less developed, quote-unquote, partly because that's a very toxic way of looking at other cultures that leads to a lot of bad shit in history, but partly because it's missing the point. I'm sure we all appreciate the fact that we live in a culture where we have access to comfortable living, tons of leisure-based materials, medical technology, and advancements that allows us to the average life expectancy to be significantly longer than that of centuries past. But regardless, none of that stuff is truly key. None of that stuff means that we can look at another culture or an older culture and think they lived lesser lives, less fulfilling lives. All societies in history love life. They see their lives as worth living. They care. They experience. They are completely valid cultures that are not strictly lesser than cultures with more technology. Technology just allows our lives to be lived differently. The value of life isn't something you can put a number on and quantify with details like what technology you have access to. The same is true for art. In this podcast episode, Troy Baker talks a bit about how the original Star Wars movies still hold up, and he showed them to his son in the modern day, and he was mesmerized by them, right? I have a bit more to add on this example that Troy brought up. The original Star Wars movies had, special effects, practical effects, a lot of the creatures like Jabba the Hutt, and, some fucking plastic-looking claymation fucker, some puppetry, whatever. It looks less realistic than modern CG is capable of creating. So some might argue that it looks worse, quote-unquote, by today's standards, but again, that is missing the point. If Star Wars looks ugly by today's standards due to how advanced CGI has gotten, then why was it ever popular in the first place? I mean, plenty of other movies at the time looked realistic because they were filming real shit, like not effects. People don't understand that the artistic process is a method of problem solving to make a good piece of art. People at the time didn't make something and then think to themselves, well, it's good enough based on what I can do. No, they made stuff because they thought it was good. Not good for the time, but just good art, comparable to other forms of art that have existed for all of history. So, older movies involved a lot more practical effects rather than CGI. They didn't have the CGI technology, so they were creative. They used what they had to create something great anyways. Lots of films with practical effects hold up to modern CGI. because when there's a will, there's a way. You know, people have different methods. People understand what technology they do and don't have access to, and they use whatever tools they do to try to make something good. They don't think, oh, well, this technology is only this good, so I can only make something, this good. No, they make good art, period. Art is not a profession here where you can only make something, good enough. It's just we can't do better. We're just so limited by our technology. No, art does not fundamentally improve with time. Modern art is not fundamentally better than the works of Shakespeare, than films like Taxi Driver, Double Indemnity, or Gone with the Wind, than books like Lord of the Flies or Of Mice and Men. Art is defined by creativity, vision, and craft. Technology only impacts what kind of art is easier or harder to make and informs the strategies with which an artist will pursue their ideas. New technology means that new artists can be inspired to use those new tools to create new kinds of art. Stuff that they weren't able to in the past, but they aren't fundamentally better than the old art. You can have all the modern technology in the world at your disposal, and you aren't going to be that much more likely, or even any more likely, to make a masterpiece than some dude in the fucking 16th century with a ink and a pen and some paper. Of course, sometimes artists lean too heavily into modern technology, like they put all their eggs into one technological basket instead of in their artistic creativity. And as such, these kinds of art are made for existing technology, and they usually end up getting outdated a bit faster than other stuff. Like, if you were to make a movie that's entire purpose is, oh, look how beautiful we can make things with CG now, but then a decade later, CG is even more powerful, and now your movie is kind of pointless. Look at, like, Spirits Within, for existence. I mean, that sucked even for the time, but you know what I mean. That doesn't mean you couldn't have made a piece of art that stood the test of time. It just means that you were foolish and you placed all the value of your work on technology that would change over time, on stuff that was limited for your time. The same is true for video games. You could say that, like, oh, really old 3D games look like shit compared to modern ones, and maybe that's true. But it's not the genre of games that's the problem. It's the creators that chose to use technology for something that would get quickly outdated. Plenty of games even older than, say, the original FF7 look beautiful to this day because they used excellent 2D art that aged better than, like, the super clunky 3D polygons. And I'm not saying that FF7 looks bad today by today's standards, because that's also a complex situation. Visual appeal is really dependent on a lot of things, on balance and design and consistency and stuff. Silent Hill 2 looks beautiful to this day, for instance. I'm just saying that it's not the genre that is limited by technology. The artists have the choice of how to leverage their existing technology to make something that will or won't age better. I know chess didn't start out as a video game, obviously, but chess was easily made into a video game, and chess has stood the test of time. They could make chess as a video game back in, like, the 80s or prior, and it still holds up, because it's designed in ways that are not limited by the technology at the time. Tetris still holds up to this day, because it isn't designed in a way that was limited by technology. It's just a genuinely fun game to play, period. But that's the next point. Suspension of disbelief. The human mind is built to smooth things over. If you claim that older games look uglier because they have lower polygon counts and fewer particle effects and such, you're failing to recognize the fact that your brain is built for this. Same with the Star Wars example, right? When you look at a very simple cartoon, your brain fills in the gaps. You look at a simple stick figure. Guy with a simple cartoon face, your brain does the rest. You interpret a face, a character, and emotion from it. Art is consumed by the human mind indexically, not literally. You know why people at the time loved the old Star Wars movies and their goofy-looking, non-realistic puppets and effects, even when most of the movies at the time were just real-life filming that looked realistic? It's because the brain suspends disbelief. It sees symbols, shapes, idioms, and it fills in the gaps. Those old, like, puppets and claymations and practical effects are not worse than modern CGI that can make something look super photorealistic because of the reality of visual abstraction, in the same way that animated movies and materials aren't inferior to the communication of live action. You know, the brain is made for suspension of disbelief. It is made for looking at a fucking puppet like Jabba the Hutt and interpreting it in the way that it's meant to be interpreted. Star Wars worked at the time and works to this day because you can watch it and interpret and feel what the movie wants you to feel, because it works, because you have an imagination. Bringing this back to video games, some people are like, oh, this game is clunky by today's standards, etc. But, like, if the game was so unplayable, why was it played in the past? People's standards were lower? I'm sorry, that's just not a thing. Art isn't something you need to consume. If older games were just shittier inherently than modern ones, why did they play them at all when they could have just done anything else with their time? Watched the existing amazing movies, read the existing amazing books. They played those games because they were fun and they were good. Period. Even looking at gameplay, let's look at Super Mario Sunshine, right? 2001. Why is Super Mario Sunshine still one of the most popular speedrun games today? Because its gameplay is fucking amazing by today's standards, by any standards. Artistic standards do not change over time. History repeats itself. You know the phrase history repeats itself, right? Because people are similar. They have similar ideas, and unless they study enough history to know which things have been done before and which haven't, they'll do the same things over and over again. They just naturally come up with the same ideas, yet again. The same situations play out in mass scale, again and again. The same is true for art. People come up with the same ideas. Art repeats itself. Almost 100% of what you like in modern time is unknowingly a shitty copy of something that already existed in the past. A generation does not have higher standards than a previous generation because they unknowingly just repeat the same ideas and do the same shit anyways. So why do people have this perception so frequently when they go back to older material? I argue that it's not a matter of differing standards or quality, but a matter of changing effort and changing overall balance and frequency. We all know that technology makes us lazy. The entire internet is built around instant gratification. Amazon ships us whatever fucking toothpicks and butt plugs we want in 2 days' time. We're used to all this, to the point that we have trouble putting in the effort we used to have to do in order to accomplish basic tasks. We're lazy. We're trained to be lazier in these areas. The same is true for consuming media. If you watch a silent film that's black and white, it's not inferior. No piece of media is inferior simply for its methods of delivery. If that were true, movies would be inherently superior to books because books don't have audio or video. It's simply different. It has different means of delivering its message, its art. There are different parts where it's designed for your imagination to fill in the ambiguities provided to you. Remember, every piece of art is made with an understanding of what its limitations are, of what its medium is. A book is written around the fact that you can't see anything or hear anything. It's written around the fact that you have to turn pages, etc. The whole package is taken into account when an artist crafts a piece of art. However, the silent film, might ask us to put in more effort in order to get something out of it. We have to think more, interpret more, use our imaginations more to visualize the scenario. You put more in to get something out. In my opinion, how much you get out of something is the measure of its quality, but how much you have to put into something to get something out of it might differ, and that is not the same thing as quality. People look at these older games and shit on them, not because you'd get less out of it if you really gave them a chance, but merely because they're not as easy to consume, because people are too lazy, made lazy by how easy most modern media is. And they don't put in the effort to suspend their disbelief and play along. But I also want to point out, this is not an attribute that is linked directly to technology either. After all, there were older games that were still, considered easy to consume, and there are modern games that are considered difficult to consume, where you have to put in a lot of effort in order to consume it. And I'm not just talking about shit like, Elden Ring or challenge-based games. But this applies to writing and storytelling and any other aspect of any piece of art. If you have, your average, Marvel movie, super easy to consume, it's paced and has jokes and stuff that keep you from getting bored. It has it has action. The plot is simple and trope-based, which makes it easy to follow and predictable. It's extremely similar to a million other stories you've already consumed, so you don't need to stretch your imagination that much to understand or anything. You can sit back with some popcorn, barely pay attention, be half asleep, and it's still super easy to consume. You'll get the appeal out of it anyways. You don't have to think that hard. You don't have to pay close attention to subtext, tight details, symbolism, or interpretations, unique approach to storytelling, unorthodox methods, unorthodox philosophy, anything like that. It is easy to understand the point of everything, and there's nothing really pushing you out of your comfort zone at all. So it's easy to consume. You can be lazy and still get everything there is to get out of it. But let's take, like, The Third Murder, for instance. Came out in 2017, not that long ago, so I would consider it still modern. Its Metacritic is in the fucking 60s, largely because people conflate quality with ease of consumption. Actually, largely because people don't even know there's such a thing as ease of consumption. You know, they'll consume something putting no effort into it and then think it sucked because it's only good when you put effort into it to get something out of it. It's modern. It uses modern technology, all that shit, you know? It's not like limiting itself, but it is a piece of art that is made to be difficult to consume. It requires a lot from the viewer to get something out of it, and that effort is well worth it, and that effort makes it memorable, but it is still not something you can be lazy with while watching and understand the point of it. This is something else that ties back to video games, older games, is the concept of modernization, or like streamlining. Streamlining is a word with both positive and negative connotations, because it can mean simplifying something, like dumbing something down, but it can also mean making things smoother and nicer. This is because streamlining means making it more consumable. And like we've already established, this is not directly correlated with quality. Sometimes when you make something more consumable, it's easier to get the stuff out of it that you want to, which makes it better. But other times, making something more consumable will dumb down its ultimate values and make it less memorable, as the consumer just gets to be lazy, go on autopilot, not really think about it, and not think about it ever again. See, that's the thing. When you make something smoother, streamlined, whatever, you make it less obtuse and annoying, but you also make it more likely to let the player beat it without ever really paying attention. You know, when someone isn't pushed out of their comfort zone, for better or worse, they're not going to find the experience special or memorable. So many games, for me, are so streamlined now, I play the whole thing on autopilot. I just do. I just clock in, play it like I've played a million fucking other video games, and it never feels special. It never makes me stop and think about it, stop and acknowledge it, or make it feel different from anything else. In the majority of cases, what makes something a great piece of art is the charm of its ideas, the magic of its ideas, not how easily consumable those ideas are. Troy Baker, in this video, also made a very similar point in this podcast episode. I think it's the most interesting thing that anyone mentioned in this video. He said that he loved the first Assassin's Creed the most out of the series because it had the fundamental charm and the wonder of the ideas that it introduced, that you could climb this high and assassinate this dude a mile below you, etc. And then he felt that the future games in the series were more mainstreamified, less inspired, with more of a focus on smoothing out the gameplay, you know, not embracing the real magic of those original ideas, just making it easier to consume, which just made it less engaging. I totally agree with this outlook. I think a clunky game with great ideas, great levels, great designs, tons of creativity that's just super special and super fun is much better than like the third iteration of it, where it just feels like more of the same, but it plays a lot smoother. Ease of consumption is not the same thing as your actual return on investment, the passion you get from a piece of art. People love those old clunky games, not because their standards were lower, but because, one, they weren't as lazy as people are now, where they were willing to put more in order to get more out, and two, because the fundamental charm of the art is so much more important than how smooth and easy the delivery is. If you consume a lot of media that you find very easy to get through and enjoy, I'd recommend, for your own benefit, to try to go out of your way a bit more and consume media that's more difficult to get to the heart of. Too many people these days confuse these concepts entirely and think that something being difficult to consume makes it bad, because they don't realize that sometimes they should put more effort into their consumption to find more value beneath the surface. No matter what, you will never get anywhere but the surface level if you are only barely paying attention. And again, I don't think these two concepts relate in a lateral way. I don't think that things that are easy to consume are fundamentally worse either than things that are hard to consume. They're just different types of entertainment. However, if you let yourself become lazy with your consumption, you'll unlock a whole new world of new passions and enjoyments by putting that extra effort and attention in, and, you know, finding all this dope-ass shit you've never realized was there in some of these pieces of media. Anyways, that's all I got for now. Thanks for listening. Talk to you later.